That didn't happen. That's not how that narrative goes.
We have to let people define what they're creating instead of telling them what they're creating.
Love it or hate it, The Chosen has inspired a cultural conversation around Jesus, his followers, and the gospel records. What do we do with it? Now, at a recent apologetics conference in Canada, Christian apologist Wes Huff, who's now famous for nearly ending the career of Billy Carson in a debate, and after that, he was featured on the Joe Rogan show. Well, he was on a Q&A panel with popular Christian YouTuber Ruslan. Now, they were asked about The Chosen, and it's a great excuse to get into the topic because here at One Life Network, we love these faith conversations that are happening inside culture. And here's Wes Huff and Ruslan addressing that.
What do we do with media concerning the enactment of Christ, like The Chosen, where historical liberties are taken to portray the gospel? Yeah, that's a doozy.
Yeah.
You go first.
Okay. It's interesting. So I am on the side of this conversation where I know people who love The Chosen and people who hate The Chosen. Yes. I think I can appreciate something like The Chosen for what it is in that there's artistic license. Now, when I had a friend who started watching The Chosen, and the way he described it to me was that when he started reading his Bible, he started picturing, what's the actor's name? Who's in The Chosen?
Jonathan Rumi.
What was it?
Jonathan Rumi.
Jonathan Rumi.
Jonathan Rumi. He started picturing Jonathan Rumi, and that concerned him. And the way that he described it is he said that when he watched the Lord of the Rings movies, and then he read the books. And when he started to read the books, these thoughts popped up in his mind where he was like, that didn't happen. That's not how that narrative goes. And he was confusing the source material. And I think that I know people who have really benefited from looking at the artistic license in something like The Chosen. And I know people who they've in their minds, for better or for worse, started confusing the source material. And so I think there's wisdom in pausing and looking at The Chosen or, any of these other artistic depictions like the David one that you mentioned, Ruslan, for what they are and not trying to make more of them than they're actually trying to portray. Yeah. I think there are dangers in that. Sure. But I think there's also an aspect of humanizing. When I was a kid, it was a reenactment of the Gospel of Matthew, where it was a narrator reading the Gospel of Matthew, and the disciples and Jesus and all the rest were just kind of acting out what was being said. And this one scene sticks out in my mind where it says, and they dropped their nets and they followed him, and the actors just kind of go, I mean, like, okay.
That's what they did.
I think that's something where The Chosen can make it more organic and actually contribute to our understanding of Scripture, as long as we're clear on what the source material is and isn't.
That's good.
That's a great way to put it, because I'm glad he brought up the whole church reenactment kind of stuff, because even the most conservative among us will give a lot of latitude to churches all over the world who for many years have done the bad hair and the bad acting and a lot of things to portray the Gospels. And they're going to mess things up, because here's the thing. This kind of stuff has been going on for 2,000 years. There are attempts to picture Jesus on the walls of the catacombs. It goes back that far. And there's always been this kind of stuff. This is not new with The Chosen. And the problem is that in one way or the other, everybody's going to get something wrong, including you, including me, because in the Bible, you're given narrative and you can't help it. You have a picture in your head that you form that's almost certainly inaccurate. When I went to the Holy Land for the first time, that was the overall impression I got. I thought, my goodness, I have a two-dimensional cartoon in my head that I have imposed on the story. Even though I want to be accurate, I want to be everything. It's unavoidable in that case. And so you want to make sure you're cultivating things that are accurate, but at the same time, you have to know that you're not as accurate. So what we ought to do probably is just give producers, as long as they're not being heretics, a lot of grace, but then also ourselves the challenge to be able to sort between, I love his language, of source material versus what's not.
Yeah,
Ruslan, did you have
I would just add, and I'm like absolutely biased, just for the record. So I'm friends with Dallas. I've been to Chosen Con. I was just
Did you know there was a Chosen Con? I didn't know that.
with John Irwin in Dallas to do an interview for the House of David. So this is me that's my friends, right? But this is what I would say. I think we have to let people define what they're creating instead of telling them what they're creating. And we do this all the time. We want to tell people what they're making instead of saying, well, instead of hearing what they're making. So they're not making a Bible show, they're making fan fiction inspired by the Bible. Yeah. And they've always been transparent about that. This is how I would define it.
And then I think it's important to point out, too, that in the Christian world, we do tend to be very absolutist about a lot of things. Like, it's either all or nothing. Like, can they make that kind of stuff or not? You either love it or you do hate it. You either think it's completely righteous and wonderful or you think it's completely evil. And typically speaking, you just need to give a little bit of latitude and grace to people. And I love his insight about what they are trying to do versus what people impose on them.
Back in the day, I used to have a buddy. He worked at a supplement store, and there was a window of time where he didn't have any money. And so he started living off of protein shakes. Wow. And after about a week...
It doesn't work, I've been there.
Yeah, after about... For real.
It's not good for the digestive system.
Not at all. After a week, to Wes's point, he had to go to the hospital and get a stomach pump.
Right. Right.
Protein shakes are not sustenance.
Yeah.
They're supplements.
Yeah.
You cannot survive off of supplements.
Yeah.
So the Chosen, Christian podcast, whatever you want to talk about, are not sustenance. They're not your bread. Yeah. They're not what you're supposed to feast on. They're just supplements in your journey.
Yeah.
And I think when we mix up the categories, then we start doing things like reading the Bible and envisioning Jonathan Rumi.
That's crazy. It's crazy. Yeah, I think...
Well, and we envision something. We're going to envision Jonathan Rumi or someone. You have a picture in your head that's likely inaccurate. Now, I have to admit about The Chosen, okay, I have a built-in suspicion with all these kinds of things because there's always something in Christian culture that you're supposed to do. If you're going to be a good Christian, it's usually books like the Left Behind series was that way, the book The Shack was that way. There's always been books or movies or different things that you just have to see, and you almost feel like you're not being, following Jesus adequately if you aren't into these things. And I interpreted The Chosen for a long time that way. I was just suspicious of it because there's also kind of two rules I've learned when it comes to especially filmmaking in the Christian world. If it's a really, really good film and it's well done and it's well acted and the cinematography is great and all that kind of stuff, it's like it got a terrible message and they've handled the whole worldview piece of it awful. Or if they try to be super accurate with the worldview part of it, the movie itself is terrible because they don't pay attention to those kind of mechanics. And that's the mistake. So I will say, when I finally, and my wife and I haven't finished the series. I think we watched through the third season or something like that. I was impressed that they followed the rules of the genre that they were in and that they are in. They're making a mini series, and I think it's interesting that they wanted to develop fan fiction. Now, the danger is, and we always have to be prepared for this, that you've seen movies that are inspired by true stories and things like that. And it drives me crazy, because I'm a history buff, that people will think that the thing that's portrayed is the actual real history. You have to be able to discern that. But that just calls for wisdom. But that doesn't make the filmmaker or the artist wrong, because there are forms that and dramatic choices that have to be made. Did you know, and this is something I'm trying to learn as my area of expertise, how the Bible communicates is very interesting. The Gospels themselves are structured according to ancient biographies and their basic form that they took back in those days. And so they write using those forms. And you can tell that the Gospel writers make editorial choices. That doesn't mean they're saying something that didn't happen, but they will arrange the material that way. The same thing happens in the epistles. The epistles are designed around the rhetorical devices of the day. It's the same way with movies. They need to be, they ought to be designed the way movies are designed, but to do that, you have to kind of move things around. And as long as it's not rank heresy or something like that, or something that's going to deceive you outright, then I think you should give it a lot of grace and enjoy it if it's high quality and if it is drawing you closer to what's going on. Ruslan makes one more great point that I think is very worth noting.
Just as you guys are both kind of saying, I mean, it leads to idolatry, essentially, to the wrong direction, right? Now you're focusing on the person and the content rather than, what they're supposed to be portraying, right? Yeah. It shouldn't replace your study.
Yeah, and again, just to add a bit more, the data all shows that The Chosen is driving people to read the Bible more, not less.
That's awesome.
which I think is a massive net positive.
Yeah.
That is a massive positive, and hopefully that's the case for you. If it is that way for you, then go for it. If it's not, then back off. You're totally free to do that. We've talked more in depth about this on this video here, where we talk about why is Christian art often bad. There's reasons for that because we just don't think clearly about it. Hope that helps. See you next time.